They describe it as the USB-C port for AI applications.
99.9999% of web servers in the world or web calls are not doing SSE.
Well, I've heard those three letters said in that order, but I have absolutely no idea what any of that means.
I can't help but think, why is this so freaking complicated?
Right. Where's that MCP thing? Let's get on that. Hey all, welcome back to the API and Anchor, a special place where we can get together, grab a drink and discuss all of the happenings in the world of APIs. I'm Martin, and as ever, I'm joined by Josh. Josh, how you doing?
Great, awesome. Good to see you again, Martin. It's been a little while. I think we took a little break, a bit of sickness, a bit of other stuff going on.
It has. I don't think we did anything in February, which was a shame, but it was an extremely short month and it just disappeared. uh, you have a few days off due to, the February flu, and all of a sudden it's March. That's the
It's
way.
only a
That's
3-day
the
month,
way.
isn't it, or something? I don't know. It's shorter than the other ones. I know that much.
I don't know about you,
So
but it honestly feels like it's getting shorter as years go by. Like
I think
February
that's a
now
known
is.
thing with age. I'm told. I refuse to accept it, but that time goes faster. I would say I cannot believe we're almost a quarter of the way through 2025.
I know, didn't we just begin? It's like
Literally, yep.
we
Yep.
really need to slow things down.
You know what's
In
making it
ter-
faster? It's all this AI stuff, all this non-stop barrage of AI that is just punching me in the face, never quits, will not stop with the AI stuff, you know?
Well, that's I mean, interesting that you say that, because typically we talk about a bunch of things here down at the API and Anchor, and but this show we're just going to talk about one thing in particular, and it's something that has kind of exploded into focus over the past couple of weeks, and that is the Model Context Protocol,
The
or
what one?
or MCP for short. I'm sure that most people have probably heard of MCP, especially if they roll inside of our little API specific bubble. Chances are it's very difficult to avoid ultimately. But I've spoken to a few people this week who have said, well, I've heard those three letters said in that order, but I have absolutely no idea what any of that means. So I thought, just for the sake of those folk who will probably be checking this out in order to understand a little bit more about what Model Context Protocol is, I'm just going to quickly explain that. Because it feels like it's absolutely everywhere right now, but we do exist in kind of a very API specific bubble. And chances are some folks won't have heard of it. So MCP was created out of the Anthropic stable, and it's an open protocol. They've open sourced this to standardize how applications provide context to LLMs, most specifically around how that context comes from external tools that most of the time are being used via some kind of an API. And interestingly, they describe it as the USB-C port for AI applications. So just as no thanks to Apple, USB-C has become pretty much the device connectivity standard. Well, they say that MCP aims to provide a standardized way to connect AI models to different sources and tools, which is nice. Good job with the analogy, but there's never a USB-C cable when I'm looking for one, so I hope this doesn't happen to MCP in a similar manner. It feels like over the past few weeks, MCP has just kind of exploded and it's everywhere. And, every single announcement from every company has something to do with it. And I was really curious because I don't think I remember anything in recent time coming out of the gate so quietly almost, and then finding its pace like many months later on. So I did a little quick look at this in Google Trends just to see what the search volume was like for Model Context Protocol. And I'm going to put it on the screen right now. You can see that as it got launched, which was around about the end of November of 2024, there was a decent level of interest in it, and you could work with it at that point. Tooling was available, documentation was available. It wasn't like it was a, hey, here's a thing, you can't use it yet. It was available and you could use it. But then after that, it just dropped off to just like nothingness, really, and like a very sort of consistent level of people being like, oh yeah, that's a thing, and then not doing anything with it until the beginning of March, where it just shot from a relatively low level of interest to, in Google Trends world, 100, which is the maximum amount of interest that anything can have at any given time. And roundabout right now, where we are, the interest is at its absolute maximum.
There's no doubt that MCP has gone virally nuts. Actually, I was at a AI dinner here in London last night that was all about MCP. Not that that's actually what talked about much, but that was the sort of primary reason for people coming together. I think there's a few things that seem to have triggered it. One is the fact that AI tools like Cursor, the IDE, and Windsurf now support MCP to extend, the way what the LLMs can do and how they can interact with other services. There's been some interesting stuff like Composio HQ, if you've seen that, might be worth bringing up their website, where they have created kind of a set of MCP servers, which we'll get into, for all of the well-known services in the world. So the Google Sheets and the Google Docs and the Salesforces of the world. It seems like there's been a bunch of things like that have kind of brought a resonance. So now, if you want to connect your cursor to your Google Sheets, in theory, that's relatively trivial, and that's kind of cool, right? So I think that's one of the reasons why it's suddenly taken off, is just that there's been this adoption that's happened outside of the obvious Claude ecosystem where it was running in the desktop app.
Yeah, I mean, I think people have reached a stage now where they've used LLMs enough in their kind of day-to-day work that the standard chat-based interface of whatever an LLM knows has reached the point where they're like, it's limiting now. I need it to be able to talk to this thing, and I need to talk to that thing, and I need it to have an awareness about some of the things that I have elsewhere in other tools in order for this to really start to become a part of my day-to-day workflow. So it feels like there's been people have been waiting for this to start, and it's not like being able to access tools inside of LLMs is a new thing. I mean, OpenAI enabled the ability to do this quite some time ago. You could upload open API document and start building interactivity around that, and it could start to work with it, and that was like well more than a year ago. So it's not like it's brand new and all of a sudden this has opened the gates to being able to access tools. What I think it has done here, though, is start to bring people together around the beginnings of some kind of standardization where even if you're outside of the Claude ecosystem, obviously this was developed by Anthropic, you can use it in other things that don't necessarily exist in that world, which starts to mean the adoption's going to ramp up. People are going to work with it, more. And, the open source nature of this has meant that the progression of the technology has been really quite quick.
Yeah, I think it's probably worth getting into a little bit more like what is it for the uninitiated in depth. So I think the idea basically is you're running an LLM, and you want that LLM to have access to external tools and data. And the only thing you really had at your disposal before with some of them was you could tell ChatGPT to go and search the web. There was a point with ChatGPT plugins where you could upload an open API doc and sort of initiate a particular plugin, but they did kind of kill that particular model. And one of the problems with that is it was kind of like a somewhat global context. And one of the interesting things about what Anthropic have done with MCP is it's not really a plugin to the LLM per se. It's a plugin to the app or the thing that's working with the LLM. So, there's a reason why you can't use MCP in Claude on the web, but you can on the desktop, because the desktop is a host that can run the MCP servers, as they're called, and interact with the LLM directly. And then similarly, Cursor does the same thing, right? And it can do it in a way that it does so across LLM. So it's not just for Anthropic's Claude, but it can do it across others. So that's very cool, very innovative step forward. And I believe it's pretty obvious actually when you look at the specification in more detail, that it started with a view of running commands, like running bash scripts. So there's two modes of a model context protocol server. One is standard I/O, so that is it can communicate via the command line effectively, sending commands that could do anything. You could make that talk to the web, right? You could make it do curl requests or whatever. And then there's another model called SSE. And SSE is a more web-oriented protocol that's more akin to what we saw with, to what we saw with the OpenAPI ChatGPT plugin. But I have many questions and many issues and concerns about the way SSE looks. I mean, frankly, as a long-time API guy, it just doesn't really make a ton of sense to me. It does feel like there was a model to make it work in standard I/O, and a little bit of a hangover has fallen over to the web, the way the web integration works. So I think it might be interesting to get into that and talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, SSE is server sent events, right? That's what you mean?
So it's like a one-directional WebSocket. Yeah. So we all know what a WebSocket is. You have a client connects to the server, and the connection is held open and maintained, which is unlike a traditional sort of request response HTTP, right? You send a request, you get a response. The connection can close. There might be some connection pooling, but typically we sort of think of that being a one-off sort of send receive. With WebSockets, it's a bidirectional open channel. So, you can send messages from the client to the server, from the server down to the client. And that's cool. And, Zuplo supports WebSockets, and we have customers using it, and it's nice. It's a tougher space to be in. You have all kinds of scalability problems because, you now can't sort of load balance connections easily across a server, a set of servers. You have to sort of maintain state to remember, that this is the client connected to you, etc. And so there was another version of this introduced called SSE, which has some similar amount of overhead, but is great for broadcast, because in that case, the server can broadcast events down to the client, but the client cannot send messages up to the server, and the server doesn't have to deal with that. Mm-hmm. And I think one of the reasons SSE may have been picked by Anthropic here is that most of the LLM APIs use SSE. And actually that makes sense when you think about what's happening in an LLM is it is running a compute loop every time to generate the next token, right? And that's why I remember when I originally saw ChatGPT, I thought the fact that it drew the text out like a typewriter was a cute little design idea. I didn't know about LLMs. I thought, that's cute, isn't it? They've made it type out for me, so I don't just get a wall of text. Yeah. But it actually turns out that's a representation of how the actual LLM is working. The compute is running a token calc. And with SSE, that's nice because now I connect to my client, I send the API, and it can stream back over server-side events the tokens as they come out, which creates for a better experience. Now, it's important to remember, though, with MCP is about providing a way for a tool, effectively augmenting an LLM, to reach out to some sort of web service, we'll call it, and get information. And let's be honest, 99.9999% of web servers in the world or web calls are not doing SSE. They're request response, right? Like the SSE is pretty rare in the sort of generic open world safari of the internet. And what's really interesting about MCP SSE, and actually, let's just draw this. I'm going to share my screen here and just sort of draw up my understanding, which I'm sure people in the comments will fact check and tell me I got it wrong. But we've been looking at this a bit recently, and chatting with people at dinner in London about it. So I'm just going to open our favorite, sponsored by Excalibur, our favorite drawing tool here at Zuplo.
We would take that sponsorship.
Yeah, we would actually. Yeah, we would. If you're interested, hit us up. So, the way I kind of think about this is that you're going to have your client over here connects to what we'll call the MCP server. That's what it's called, a server, I guess. And let's imagine it's talking to some nice, pretty REST API. What would be a good REST API? Think of an example, Martin.
It would be the to-do list API.
So creative. You're on fire today. To-do list API. So my understanding is that what happens is the client, when it decides it, with the client being in this case, let's imagine it's Cursor or Windsurf or something, it creates a connection to the MCP server by making I believe it's a GET request. You don't hold me to that one. I believe it is. And the MCP server then holds open a connection and starts sending back messages. So I'll do messages as these smaller payloads. And one of the first messages it will send back contains an endpoint that is the endpoint at which you want to receive messages. And it will have like a session ID, token on it or something.
Yeah.
And so what that tells the client now is if you want to send something to this server, so they've kind of created their own like WebSocket implementation in a way, then you send a post request to this MCP server. Now, you can imagine the scaling problem this creates if you want to do this at scale, because you have to be sure to hit the same endpoint, the same sort of state to be able to connect these two things across now. So what would happen is I'd do a post here saying like, saying list tools, like tell me what are the things that this MCP server can do. And that will then send back a message over the original connection. And all of this is using JSON RPC. So it's very custom. And, frankly, implementing SSE, if you're using one of the SDKs, yes, it's okay. But then you do have to think about this scaling. And that's why actually one interesting implementation is using Cloudflare workers and durable objects. Durable objects are good at this kind of state. You could create a state for the session in a durable object and Cloudflare workers will route you. So I think they've produced an SDK for this, which is kind of cute. Not to be disparaging, but it's like a nice, simple way of solving this problem. But I can't help but think, why is this so freaking complicated? At the end of the day, so I post list tools, and then I'm going to start invoking the tools, right? So I'm going to do another post over here, which is like get to dos, and that's going to make a call. This is going to go over here. It's going to get the to-dos. The response is going to come back here. And rather than just send it as a beautiful response synchronously here, like I would kind of expect, it's going to send the to-dos back as a message over that open connection. And it's just way harder for everyone to implement this like state management, reconnection, connection failing. There's a reason why I called it the Safari of the internet. Really freaking love stateless, like obviously we have cookies and we have tokens that help us remember stuff, but we're good at that now. We've solved that problem at scale with databases and so on, and auth. But managing all this here is really quite hard now. So there's some interesting things going on in the world. Like let's talk about MCP.run, which is by do I have to declare friendships? I have no stock in Dialypso or but our friend Steve Manuel of Dialypso, this is his profile picture there, has built MCP Run, which is kind of a way of running MCP servers at scale, and so they've built a bunch here. We mentioned Composio HQ are doing this for, let me just find these guys, are doing this for sort of all of the services they're building their own sort of MCP service. So if you go to, this is loading very slowly for me here. Let me share my tab. I think because I'm streaming. But yeah, they've kind of created MCP servers for all your favorite, like your Notion and your Slack and your Google Sheets and your GitHub. Because it's hard to create these yourself. You don't want to host them yourself. You kind of just want an endpoint. But it seems inevitable to me that whatever the standard for this becomes, that each and every API publishing company is going to post the appropriate type of endpoint. So if MCP SSE is successful and is the de facto standard, then Notion will have an MCP server they host. Discord will, Gmail will, etc. What's really interesting is what's going to happen to all of the businesses out there that have APIs. And they probably have tons of APIs that as they go on their AI journey, they're going to want to expose those to the LLM so the LLM can work with it. The similar with their SaaS APIs that we're talking about here with the Composio scenario. You're going to build these agents that want to talk to Salesforce, that want to talk to Workday, that want and also need to coordinate with your own internal APIs that you've built. How are they going to do it? How are they going to manage and govern and build all of these MCP servers? So if MCP continues to look like this, then there's like a huge product space here for someone to build a way of making this easy and managing it and governing it at scale. Which would be interesting to Zoopla, right? Like, make no bones about it, that this is kind of what we do. The question that I'm struggling with is, I can't see an honest reason for 99.99% of use cases why this complexity exists. There's a couple where you want SSE and where you need this like sort of asynchronicity, but mostly you don't. And
Yeah.
will the standard that actually gets adopted just be much simpler and much closer to open API that we all know and love? So that's the big question in my mind about the future of MCP. I think MCP standard IO makes sense. I don't have any challenges though. But for the web stuff, I've definitely got one eyebrow raised and watching carefully.
Yeah. It's interesting that, this is quite a lift. And I wonder whether there's going to be reticence inside of those larger like enterprise organizations about going down too deep of an engineering rabbit hole to implement this in some of these ways, just in case like actually in a few months time it goes away, or the architecture changes really quite drastically, and then all of a sudden you're throwing out 4 months of the work you've already done because they've decided actually let's simplify it, let's bring it more close to just working with an open API document instead of needing all of this. And it's been done differently. Is that a risk, do you think?
I think, well, look, I think if my take, for what it's worth, is if MCP SSE becomes the de facto way that we sort of augment LLMs to talk to, let's call them web services. No WSDL here, but let's call them web services. Then there's a space in the market for a product like MCP Run that you can run privately, and US Bank will buy a copy of this and will run it internally. Like that would be the way to go. I don't think many people will want to be building these ad hoc. There'll be open source SDKs as there are today, but then you got to host it and deal with the connectivity, and maybe you use the Cloudflare thing, but it just feels to me like it's unnecessary. And so I guess there's two worlds. There's one where it's successful and there's a big space here and there's a big market for building these MCP sort of server hosts, if you will. And if you imagine what it is, each service would just have a mapping file that says this is how we map. This is what Steve and his team have built here, effectively. This is how we map from an open API doc to an MCP server and deal with all the weirdness around SSE and JSON RPC.
Do you think that there's the possibility that ultimately, the LLMs are just going to step over the need for this and just go from, right, hey, you know what, if you can give us something that will tell us like what that API is and what it expects, there's some document form you can use for this. I forget what it's called. Would that be enough ultimately, you think? Because it does feel like this is
I think it could basically
interim to me.
Yeah,
it feels interim.
I agree. And I I have spoken to someone from Anthropic, and didn't get a ton of information from them. Suffice to say, the MCP spec is very early. There are some sort of known, would compromises be the word in it? But no, I didn't. No commitment. To me, it feels like actually what ChatGPT did with OpenAPI in a manifest probably makes more sense. So I don't think a simple OpenAPI doc is probably going to cut it, but not far from, right? Like if you take the same idea that you could imagine doing it now, right? Where we could probably fake it right now, where we write a little script that generates a bunch of context for an LLM based on an OpenAPI doc so that it knows how to make the call. And then, we tell it how to make the call. It gives us an instruction set back. This is very just agentic. It's like building a little sub-agent, right? Which I think is kind of what's happening. That you could do that with OpenAPI today. I think one of the challenges there is probably most around identity and auth. When we look at the enterprise scenario particularly, how do I, how specifically, I don't want to just like paste my JOT token into ChatGPT or something. How does it understand how auth works and that handoff works? So there need to be a little bit of a manifest, if I can, and you know, since I'm going to do air quotes, we'll use the hand here. A manifest that would provide a little bit of additional information. Oh, maybe I missed something. Maybe there's enough in Open API. Maybe actually it's just a bunch of extensions to Open API. But in my heart, that's where I feel this should go. Maybe with Erazo as well for some sort of understanding of workflow. I don't think MCP contains much about workflow right now, to be honest, though. You would just be orchestrating that yourself in the MCP server.
Yeah, you just build it like, you know, this is the direction I need you to take in order to achieve this ultimate thing, and I've written that for you. There you go. Like, handle it like a tool would in that sense. Yeah, it feels a little bit to me like there's an element of safety that's coming from this here, and I get that, right? There's a bunch of stuff that LLMs can't understand properly and do well, and sometimes they go crazy with some of this stuff, and to just give them something like that and say, okay, have at it. I understand the reticence around this, and actually from a larger adoption, maybe a larger company point of view, having something like MCP gives you the ability to build in a much more strict approach to working with what it is that you offer, and allow it to work exactly the way that it's meant to, regardless of whether there's any kind of hallucination or madness that comes from the LLM itself. So for right now, I think I understand it from that point of view, right? It's like safety, guardrails, very important. Need to have them. Don't want strange stuff happening. We can control it if we use something like this. But, you know, down the line, it really feels as if like just this is going to get absorbed into whatever else it is, and it can just do it without that necessary additional server.
I'm interested what folks think in the comments, actually. Are these the same thing? How do they feel about the standards? What do they think we're going to net out? That'd probably be pretty interesting to get some thoughts.
Yeah. So just as a final thought, hype or helpful, do you think, Josh?
Oh, can I say a bit of both? I think it's definitely a lot of hype, and I think you know, no disrespect to anyone who's rushed on it. I think the reason people are rushing on it is to catch some of the marketing, you know, hurricane or, you know, typhoon.
Yeah, nothing wrong with it.
No, nothing wrong with that. I think the standard I/O stuff actually makes sense, that we want a standard there for how to augment AI for access to standard I/O. I think the approach today they've taken for web services is overly complicated, doesn't make sense, and I think that is hype, and so will be isn't particularly helpful. I mean, yeah, it enables a scenario that wasn't enabled before, so it's great in that regard. But I predict it will be. I predict it's more chip than salsa.
There we go, and that is the thumbnail title. Right there. Right.
MCP, more chip than salsa, question mark. I love it.
Yeah,
I love
more
it.
chip than salsa. We'll see how well that does in terms of views. Fantastic. Well, look, Josh, thanks so much. I really appreciate the insights on all of this. And of course, if you have insights or you want to counter anything that we mentioned in here, then feel free to do it in the comments down below. We'll be checking. I'm more than happy to engage with you there. And of course, if you want to catch more episodes of the API and Anchor or anything else that we create here on YouTube, then you can do so by subscribing to the channel. We very much appreciate that. We're putting out content relatively regularly, and we should be back on the API and Anchor schedule now. So there should be another episode of this in the next couple of weeks. We look forward to seeing you then. Josh, thanks very much. Spooky hand. Bye, spooky hand.
See you later.